Silence holds a power that most people overlook. In a world where everyone is constantly talking, explaining, defending, and justifying, silence stands out. It makes people uncomfortable because they aren't used to it. Most people believe that when you stop talking, when you stop explaining, you've given up or lost the battle. But in reality, silence is the strongest response you can ever give. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a declaration of self-control, emotional mastery, and confidence. When you choose silence over arguing, over pleading, over chasing, you communicate something deeper than words ever could. You send a message that cannot be misinterpreted. See, words can be twisted, arguments can be manipulated, and emotions can be used against you. But silence is undeniable. Silence leaves a person alone with their own thoughts, forcing them to confront the reality of their actions. And that's where its true power lies. Think about it. When someone expects you to react, when they expect you to fight for their attention, when they expect you to explain yourself, and you do nothing, you disrupt the entire dynamic. They are left wondering, they are left questioning, they are left uncomfortable. Because suddenly the power they thought they had over you is gone. Suddenly they realize that you don't need to explain yourself, that you don't need to beg for understanding, that you don't need to chase them for attention. And that's when something shifts inside them. When you respond in silence, people start to analyze their own actions. They start replaying everything that was said, everything that was done, trying to figure out why you stopped engaging. They go back over every detail, looking for an answer. And what happens when they find none? The silence starts eating at them. They start to feel the weight of it. The more they think about it, the more they question themselves. When you argue with someone, you give them fuel. You give them a reason to push back, to defend themselves, to justify their behavior. But when you remove yourself from the conversation completely, they are left standing in an empty room, arguing with their own thoughts. And no one wants to argue with themselves. That is why silence is so powerful. It turns the tables in a way that no words ever could. The reason why most people struggle with silence is that they confuse it with weakness. Society has conditioned us to believe that if we don't explain ourselves, if we don't fight back, if we don't voice our feelings constantly, we are losing. But that is a lie. The truth is, silence is the greatest display of strength. It shows that you have nothing to prove, that you are so confident in yourself, in your worth, in your value, that you don't need validation from anyone. When you respond with silence, people begin to see you differently. They realize that you are not desperate for their approval, that you are not easily swayed by their manipulation, that you are not dependent on their attention. And this realization makes them uncomfortable because it forces them to confront a truth they were not ready for. You don't need them. And nothing is more unsettling than realizing that someone you thought you had control over has completely detached. The moment you go silent, the power dynamic shifts. Suddenly, they're the ones wondering if they made a mistake. Suddenly, they're the ones replaying past conversations, searching for clues. And the longer you stay silent, the stronger your position becomes. Most people don't realize how much their words give away their emotions. When you argue, you reveal frustration. When you plead, you reveal desperation. When you chase, you reveal insecurity. But when you go silent, you reveal nothing. And that nothingness, that void, it is what makes people anxious. It is what makes them question everything. Because humans fear the unknown more than anything. When someone stops responding, we don't know what they are thinking. We don't know if they are angry, if they are hurt, if they have moved on. And that uncertainty is what drives people crazy. It forces them to dwell on their own actions, to reflect on the way they treated you, and more often than not, they start to regret. They start to feel the weight of what they did. This is why silence is more powerful than any argument. It creates an impact that lingers, an effect that doesn't fade. Unlike words which can be forgotten, ignored, or misinterpreted, silence cannot be denied. It sits with a person, haunts them, makes them think. It stays in their mind long after the moment has passed. And that is what makes it so effective. Most people think that being silent means doing nothing, but that's not true. Silence is an active choice. It is a decision to remove yourself from unnecessary battles, to protect your energy, to refuse to engage in situations that drain you. It is a conscious effort to prioritize your peace over proving a point. It is easy to react. It is easy to argue. It is easy to chase after people who refuse to see your value. But it takes immense strength to be silent, to walk away, to allow people to feel the absence of your presence without explaining yourself. And the irony of it all, the moment you stop begging, the moment you stop justifying, the moment you go silent, that's when people start paying attention. That's when they start missing you. That's when they start realizing just how much your presence meant. And by the time they finally understand the power of your silence, you've already outgrown them. When you are always available, always responding, always making the effort, people get used to it. They start seeing your presence as something ordinary, something they don't have to work for, something that will always be there no matter how they treat you. And when people take you for granted, they stop appreciating you. They stop valuing what you bring into their lives because they assume it will never go away. But the moment you remove yourself, the moment you go silent, something interesting happens. Suddenly, the absence is louder than all the noise you once made. Suddenly, your presence, which they once overlooked, becomes noticeable in a way they never expected. See, people rarely appreciate something while they have it. It's human nature. When something is consistent, when it's always there, it becomes background noise. It becomes something expected rather than something cherished. But when it disappears, when it is no longer accessible, that's when the realization kicks in. That's when people start to feel the loss. They don't miss the things they had easy access to. They miss the things they once had but can no longer reach. And that is why your absence is more powerful than your presence ever was. Think about someone who constantly texts first, who always initiates conversations, who always puts in the effort to keep a relationship alive. At first, it might be appreciated. It might even be welcomed. But over time, the other person gets comfortable. They expect the messages. They expect the calls. They expect the effort without ever having to match it. The dynamic shifts. And before long, the one making the effort starts to feel unappreciated. They start to wonder why the other person doesn't try as hard. But the truth is simple. They don't have to. They have learned that no matter what, the effort will always come from you. But what happens when that effort stops? What happens when the person who always initiated suddenly falls silent? That is when the power of absence starts working. Suddenly the other person is left wondering. They check their phone, expecting a message that never comes. They wait for a call that doesn't arrive. And with every hour, every day, the weight of that absence grows heavier. They start to wonder if something is wrong. They start to wonder if they did something to push you away. And most importantly, they start to realize just how much your presence actually meant. This is why silence is so much more powerful than words, because when you are present, people listen, but they don't always hear. They see you, but they don't always recognize your worth. But when you remove yourself, they have no choice but to notice. They feel the shift, the emptiness left behind, the void that can't be ignored. And it forces them to think about all the things they once overlooked. It's a psychological effect. People become conditioned to routines, to expectations. If you are always there, always responding, always showing up, they get used to it. It becomes normal. But when you break that pattern, when you remove what was once constant, It disrupts their entire perception. It creates discomfort, confusion. And in that confusion, they start analyzing their own actions. They start questioning why they took you for granted in the first place. This is why some people don't realize the value of a good person until it's too late. Because while you were there, they never had to question it. They never had to work for it. They never had to fear losing it. But once you step back, once you take that value away, it becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, they remember the effort you put in, the support you provided, the comfort of knowing someone was always there. And that memory, that realization, is far more powerful than anything you could have said. People often think that to make someone realize their worth, they have to explain, argue, or prove a point. But the truth is, absence teaches the lesson that words never could. When you argue, people get defensive. When you plead, they dismiss you. But when you disappear, when you go quiet, when you remove your energy from their life, they are left to face the consequences of their actions without any distractions. They are left alone with their own thoughts, their own reflections, and that is when the real impact is felt. The irony is that people only start searching for you when they can no longer find you. They only start missing you when they realize they no longer have access to you. And by the time they finally understand your worth, you've already detached. You've already moved forward. Because the absence that made them reflect on what they lost is the same absence that allowed you to grow beyond needing their validation. Silence is a weapon that cuts deeper than any words ever could. It does not require explanation, does not need justification, and cannot be argued against. It is the most unsettling response because it forces people to sit with their own thoughts, to analyze their own behavior, and to face a reality they may not be prepared for. When you remove yourself from a situation, when you decide to go silent instead of explaining, begging, or justifying, you shift the power dynamic entirely. Suddenly, you are no longer reacting, you are in control. And the moment you take control, everything changes. People are used to reactions. They are used to arguments, to explanations, to emotional outbursts. When you react, they have something to engage with. They can twist your words, manipulate the situation, turn things against you. But when you choose silence, you remove all of that. You take away their ability to play the game they are so used to winning. You no longer give them the opportunity to justify their actions or manipulate the situation. Instead, you leave them alone with their own thoughts, and that is where the real discomfort begins. Silence forces people to sit with the reality of what they have done. It makes them question their actions in a way that no argument ever could. When someone expects you to fight for them, to explain yourself, to beg for their attention, and you do nothing, they are left with nothing but their own conscience. And for many people, that is the worst place to be, because now they are the ones who have to justify their actions to themselves. They are the ones who have to wonder why you stopped responding, why you stopped trying, why you are no longer giving them the energy they took for granted. The human mind does not handle uncertainty well. When someone is used to a certain dynamic, when they expect you to react, to argue, to fight for their attention, and suddenly you don't, it creates a void. And in that void, their mind starts racing. They start asking themselves questions they never considered before. Did I push them too far? Did I lose them for good? What are they thinking? These thoughts become intrusive, relentless, inescapable. And the longer you stay silent, the louder those thoughts become. Most people think that arguing is the best way to be heard. They believe that if they explain themselves enough, if they say the right words, if they plead their case well enough, they will finally get through to the other person. But that is rarely how it works. When someone is set in their ways, when they believe they are right, no amount of arguing will change their mind. In fact, arguing often makes things worse. It gives them more reasons to justify their position, more excuses to hold on to, more opportunities to twist your words. But silence takes all of that away. It leaves them with nothing but the weight of their own decisions. It forces them to confront the truth without any distractions. It strips away all the noise and leaves them alone with the reality of their choices. And that is far more powerful than any argument ever could be. There is a reason why people say that silence speaks louder than words, because it does. It sends a message that cannot be ignored, a message that lingers long after the conversation is over. It is a statement of self-respect, of strength, of knowing your worth. When you choose silence, you are saying, I do not need to prove myself to you. I do not need to explain my worth. If you cannot see it on your own, my words will not change that. And that is a realization that can shake a person to their core. The power of silence is that it creates space for reflection. It forces people to look inward, to analyze their actions, to question their assumptions. It disrupts their expectations and makes them uncomfortable. And in that discomfort, growth happens. They start to realize things they never noticed before. They start to see the impact of their actions in a way they never did when they had the distraction of your words, your explanations, your justifications. This is why silence is not just a response. It is a strategy. It is a conscious choice to remove yourself from situations that no longer serve you, to protect your energy, to refuse to engage in battles that are not worth fighting. It is a way of reclaiming your power, of setting boundaries without ever having to say a word. Because the moment you stop responding, the moment you go silent, the moment you remove yourself from the equation, you force people to face the consequences of their actions on their own. And that is when the real lessons are learned. Most people do not realize how much of their power they give away through words. They think that explaining themselves, defending themselves, justifying their feelings is the way to gain control. But in reality, the more you explain, the more you give the other person control over the situation. You give them something to push against, something to argue with, something to manipulate. But when you go silent, you take all of that away. You take away their ability to twist your words, to make excuses, to justify their actions, and instead, you leave them with nothing but the truth. The truth that they lost something valuable. The truth that their actions had consequences. The truth that you are no longer available for their games. And that truth, that realization, is far more painful than anything you could have ever said. When you choose silence over reaction, something shifts in the way people perceive you. They begin to notice that the old patterns no longer apply, that the dynamic has changed in a way they can't quite control. The moment you stop reacting, you break the cycle of dependency, you remove the predictability they relied on, and that is where the discomfort begins. People thrive on predictability, on knowing what to expect from those around them. When someone has always had your attention, always had the certainty of your response, they assume it will never change. They get comfortable, even careless in the way they treat you. But when you remove that certainty, when you no longer give them access to your energy, it creates a void they don't know how to fill. That void is unsettling, unfamiliar, and in that space of uncertainty, they are forced to confront something they never had to before: their own accountability. You see, when you argue, when you explain yourself, when you try to make someone understand your perspective, you are still giving them access to your energy. You are still investing in them, still allowing them to take up space in your mind. But when you go silent, when you choose not to engage, you communicate something far more powerful. You are no longer participating in a situation that does not serve you. You are no longer willing to exhaust yourself trying to prove your worth. And that is when people start to notice. At first, they may act as if your silence doesn't affect them. They may pretend they don't care, that they are unfazed by your withdrawal. But silence has a way of lingering. It stays in the background, slowly creeping into their thoughts, making them question why things feel different. And the longer you stay silent, the louder that silence becomes. They start to wonder why you are no longer responding the way you used to. They start to feel the weight of your absence, the loss of your attention. And the more they think about it, the more they begin to realize just how much of an impact you actually had. Silence is a mirror. It forces people to see themselves in a way they never had to before. When you react, they can focus on your reaction instead of their own behavior. They can dismiss your emotions, argue against your words, shift the blame onto you. But when you say nothing, when you refuse to engage, they have nothing left to deflect. They are left with only themselves. And that is often the hardest thing for a person to face. This is why silence is so powerful. It creates space for reflection. And reflection is not always comfortable. It forces people to sit with their own actions, their own choices, their own mistakes. It makes them realize that their words and behavior have consequences. And when they are no longer receiving your energy, your time, your attention, they are left with nothing but their own thoughts. In that silence, they begin to wonder what went wrong. They start to replay past conversations, past interactions, trying to understand where the shift happened. And the more they think about it, the more they realize that they were the ones who changed the course of the relationship. People often take for granted what is given too freely. When they know they have access to you, when they believe that no matter what they do, you will always be there, they stop valuing what you bring into their life. They stop appreciating the effort you put in, the love you give, the loyalty you offer. But the moment you take that away, the moment you stop showing up in the way they have come to expect, everything changes. They start to feel the weight of your absence in a way they never felt the presence of your effort. And that realization is what makes silence hurt more than any words ever could. There is an undeniable power in restraint, in knowing when to walk away, in choosing not to engage in battles that drain your energy. When you withhold your reaction, you are not being weak. You are exercising control. You are showing that you will not be manipulated, that you will not be drawn into cycles of drama or toxicity. And most importantly, you are proving that your energy is valuable, that your presence is not something to be taken lightly. When people no longer have access to you, they start to question everything. They wonder if they misjudged your importance, if they underestimated your value. And that questioning, that internal conflict is where the real transformation happens. Because now they are the ones chasing clarity. They're the ones trying to understand, and in their search for answers, they realize what they never saw before: your worth. But by the time they come to this realization, you have already moved forward. You have already reclaimed your energy, redirected your focus. And that is the true power of silence. It does not just change the way others see you, it changes the way you see yourself. It teaches you that you do not need validation from those who fail to appreciate you. It shows you that your worth was never dependent on someone else's recognition. And in that realization, you find the strength to walk away from anything that no longer aligns with the respect you deserve. When you finally decide to stop begging, stop explaining, stop trying to make someone see your worth, something shifts. It's as if a weight is lifted, not because the situation has changed, but because you have changed. Because you've changed, because you've changed, because you have changed. The moment you realize that your value does not depend on someone else's ability to recognize it, you reclaim your power. You begin to see yourself differently. And in doing so, you force others to see you differently as well. For so long, you may have felt the need to justify yourself, to prove that you were worthy, to convince someone, whether it was a partner, a friend, a colleague, that you deserved their time, their effort, their respect. And maybe in the past you believed that if you just communicated better, if you just showed them how much you cared, if you just tried a little harder, they would finally see you the way you wanted to be seen. But time and experience teach a different lesson. You cannot make someone value you if they are unwilling to see your worth on their own. There is a profound power in realizing this truth. When you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided they don't need to understand you, when you stop trying to win over those who are content with misunderstanding you, you shift your entire energy. You no longer waste your breath on arguments that go in circles, on conversations that drain you, on situations that diminish you. Instead, you redirect all of that energy inward. And in doing so, you create space for something far more valuable: self-respect. People can feel when your energy changes. They can sense when you are no longer trying to prove yourself. At first, they may not understand it. They may even be confused by the shift. But eventually, they will realize that something is different. You are no longer pleading for their validation. You are no longer reacting the way they expected. You have pulled away, not with words, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling: silence. And that silence speaks volumes. It communicates what words never could. It tells them that you are no longer available for their games, that you are no longer willing to diminish yourself just to keep their attention. It tells them that you have moved on, even if they were not ready for you to do so. And that is when they begin to feel the loss. Because the presence they once took for granted is no longer there. The attention they assumed would always be theirs has disappeared. And now they are left to sit with a realization that cuts deeper than anything you could have ever said. You no longer need them. This is where the shift happens. This is when they begin to question everything, because whether people admit it or not, they crave the attention of those who value them. Even if they mistreated you, even if they never reciprocated your energy, they felt the weight of your presence. And when that presence is removed, when the certainty of your availability is gone, it leaves a void they don't know how to fill. At first, they may try to ignore it. They may pretend that your silence does not affect them. But silence has a way of lingering. It does not fade as quickly as words do. It stays with people, echoing in their minds, forcing them to face their own actions, their own neglect, their own mistakes. And as time goes on, as your absence becomes more noticeable, the regret begins to set in. They start to wonder if they miscalculated, if they underestimated you. They start to question whether they were too careless, too dismissive, too sure that you would always be there. And the more they think about it, the more they begin to realize just how much they lost when they lost you. But by the time they come to this realization, something else has happened. You have outgrown the version of yourself that once needed them. The person who would have once begged, explained, justified is no longer there. The need for validation has faded. The desire for their approval has disappeared. And in its place, there is only one thing left: certainty. Certainty in your own worth. Certainty in your own value. Certainty in the fact that you never needed their recognition to be whole. This is the power of walking away without a word. It is not just about making them realize what they lost. It is about making yourself realize what you gained. It is about shifting the focus from them to you. It is about stepping into a new version of yourself, one that no longer settles, no longer pleads, no longer waits to be chosen, because the moment you choose yourself, the moment you decide that your energy is too valuable to waste on those who refuse to see it, you set a new standard. And that standard, it changes everything. It determines the way people treat you. It decides the kind of energy you allow into your life. It ensures that you will never again settle for being someone's afterthought, someone's option, someone's convenience. Because once you have seen your worth for yourself, once you have felt the power of your own presence, you will never again allow anyone to make you feel like you are not enough. This is why silence is more powerful than begging. Because silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of self-respect. It is a declaration that you will no longer give your energy to those who do not appreciate it. And in that silence, you do not just find strength, you find freedom. When you decide to go silent, when you finally withdraw your energy from a situation that has drained you, something profound happens, not just externally, but within you. Silence is not just a tool for influencing others. It is a gateway to your own transformation. It forces you to sit with yourself, to truly confront your own thoughts, your own patterns, and the reality of the situation you have been entangled in. This is where growth begins. Because in the absence of distractions, in the space where noise once filled your mind, you are left with only one thing: clarity. Clarity does not come when you are in the middle of a situation, when you are constantly explaining yourself, constantly reacting, constantly trying to make someone else understand your worth. Clarity comes when you stop, when you step back, when you allow yourself the space to breathe, to think, to feel without external influence. And often what you realize in that silence is something you could not see before. You were giving too much of yourself to something that was never meant to grow. When you pull back your energy, when you reclaim your focus, you start to see things for what they truly are rather than what you wanted them to be. And that realization is not always comfortable. Because for a long time, you may have convinced yourself that if you just tried harder, if you just communicated better, if you just proved your worth a little more, things would have been different. But silence strips away those illusions. It forces you to accept reality, and that acceptance is the foundation of transformation. Growth does not happen in chaos. It does not happen when you are consumed with trying to fix something that is broken, or when your energy is tied up in seeking validation from people who refuse to see you. Growth happens when you redirect all of that energy inward. When you stop chasing and start building. When you shift your focus from what is missing to what is possible. This is where the real work begins. Because when you stop filling your mind with the noise of external approval, you are left with one important question: who am I without them? That question is powerful because it forces you to detach from the idea that your worth was ever dependent on someone else's recognition. It makes you realize that you were never defined by how much someone else valued you. You were defined by how you valued yourself. In silence, you start to recognize the patterns that have been holding you back. You start to notice how often you ignored your own intuition, how many times you compromised your own standards just to keep the peace, how much energy you wasted on people who were never willing to match your effort. And as these realizations settle in, something shifts. You start to change the way you show up for yourself. You stop accepting half-hearted effort. You stop entertaining people who do not reciprocate your energy. You stop justifying behavior that does not align with the love and respect you know you deserve. And the more you hold yourself to this new standard, the more the world begins to reflect that back to you. Because the energy you put out determines the energy you attract. When you move with confidence, with certainty, with the knowledge that your presence is valuable, people can feel that. And those who once underestimated you will begin to realize that they no longer have access to the version of you that tolerated less than what you deserved. This is the part that they never see coming, because they were used to the version of you that over-explained, that waited for them to change, that held on to hope even when the evidence suggested otherwise. But that version of you no longer exists. You have outgrown the need to be understood by those who refuse to listen. You have stepped into a place where your peace matters more than their approval. As you grow, something else happens. You begin to see the difference between attachment and connection. Attachment is based on fear, on the idea that you need someone in order to feel complete. Connection, on the other hand, is based on choice. It is rooted in mutual respect and a shared energy that does not require one person to diminish themselves for the sake of the other. And once you experience true connection, once you understand that love, friendships, and relationships should add to your life rather than drain you, you will never again settle for anything less. But this level of growth does not come without discomfort. There will be moments when the silence feels unbearable, when you are tempted to go back to old patterns just because they are familiar. There will be moments when the loneliness creeps in, when you wonder if maybe you made the wrong choice, when you question whether it would be easier to just go back to what you knew. But every time you feel that doubt, remind yourself of this. Growth is uncomfortable, but staying the same is painful. You were not meant to remain in situations that keep you stagnant. You were not meant to lower yourself just to fit into spaces that do not honor your worth. The discomfort you feel in this season of silence is not a sign that you should turn back. It is proof that you are shedding an old version of yourself, and what comes next is far greater than anything you are leaving behind. This is how silence leads to transformation. Not because it punishes those who took you for granted, but because it frees you. It gives you the space to rebuild yourself from the inside out. It forces you to create a life where your peace is a priority, where your self-respect is non-negotiable, where you no longer beg for a seat at tables that were never meant for you. And as you embrace this transformation, you will find that the people who are meant to be in your life will meet you at this new level, while those who were never meant to stay will fade into the past.